This video is on sine and cosine functions. So we're just going to look at what the graphs look like for sine and cosine. So the sine graph, it starts at 0, 0. It goes up and then down. Okay, so this is called a whole period or a whole cycle. For just y equals sine of theta, it always goes from 0 to 2 pi, and it always looks like this for the most basic type of sine function. Cosine, y equals cosine of theta, it always starts at the top, goes down, and then comes back up. So this would be a whole cycle, also called a period. So it goes from 0 to 2 pi. And the domain for both of these contain all real numbers. Remember, domain is the x value, so this would continue going in both directions. Same with this. This would be all real numbers. For the most basic type of sine and cosine, the range would have a restriction. It would fall between where y is greater than or equal to -1, but less than or equal to +1. So it falls between 1 and -1 for the y values. Same with cosine. Amplitude is 1 for each of the most basic type of sine and cosine function. And I said the period would be 2 pi. Remember, 2 pi is the same as 360 degrees. So if we're talking about radians versus degrees. Same with cosine. All right, so just looking at amplitude, amplitude is half the distance between the maximum and the minimum. So if you're looking at the maximum and minimum value, just half the distance would be 1, which is why the amplitude is 1 in this case. The period is the length of a cycle, and this would repeat. It just keeps repeating. Same thing with this. It just keeps repeating. That's why it cycles, it continues. All right, so we're going to have to find the equations. So this is really important to help you find the equations. So you're going to be plugging in values for a and b. So y equals some number times sine, and b is multiplied by theta. Same thing with cosine. The amplitude, to find the amplitude, it's the absolute value of a, the number that's multiplied in front of sine. The period, or the length of the cycle, is 2 pi over the absolute value of b. And if you're creating the equation and you need to find what b is so you can plug it in, it's 2 pi divided by the period. Remember, the period is the same thing as the cycle. So these are all very important, and we are going to use them all right now. All right, so first off, we're going to find the amplitude and the period of each equation. So y equals sine x. This one's pretty easy. So amplitude is just the absolute value of a, and a is the number that's in front of sine, which in this case, it would just be a 1. The absolute value of 1 is 1. Period is 2 pi over the absolute value of b. b is the number that in this case would be multiplied by x. It'd be 1x. So absolute value of 1 is 1. So the period is just 2 pi. Okay. So looking at the next one, we have y equals 4 cosine of -2x. So amplitude, absolute value of 4 is 4. Remember, absolute value just makes it positive, so it's distance from 0. Period is 2 pi divided by the absolute value of b. In this case, -2. Absolute value of -2 is +2. 2 pi over 2 is equal to pi. Okay, so I'm just going to have you try 2 just like those, and then I'll go through the answers with you when you're ready. All right, y equals 3 sine 1/2 x. So the amplitude is 3. The period is 2 pi over 1/2, but you cannot have a fraction in a fraction. So I always like to do keep it, change it, flip it. So keep your first term the same, Change division to multiplication, flip your second one over. 2 pi times 2 over 1 is just 2 is equal to 4 pi. And number 2, amplitude is 1. The period is 2 pi over absolute value of -4 is 4, which just reduces to pi over 2. So always leave it, don't change it to a decimal, leave it as a fraction, reduce as much as possible. All right, now we're going to identify the amplitude, period, and equation of each graph. So let's do 2 together. So the first one, remember that amplitude is half the distance between the maximum and the minimum, or because it's the same distance from 0 up and 0 down, we know that the amplitude is just 2. The period, a length of one cycle, is 4 pi. All right, so now we have to write the equation. All right, my equation is y equals the amplitude times, I know that this cycle is a sine cycle. So I know it's sine. Okay, but I need to find what b is. To find what b is equal to, it's always 2 pi over the period, which is 4 pi. Well, pi divided by pi is 1, and 2 over 4 reduces to 1/2. So I know that b is 1/2, so it's y equals 2 sine of 1/2 x. And if you want to put this part in parentheses, you can. You don't have to. All right, let's look at this one. Our amplitude, half the distance between the maximum and the minimum, which is 5. Period would be the length of one cycle, which is 2 pi. Okay, my equation. All right, I know this is cosine, but I can see that it's flipped over. When it's flipped over, that means it's multiplied by -1. So that means that the amplitude was originally negative. So I might want to just write, I know it's a cosine and I know it's flipped. Anytime that I see it's flipped, I know my amplitude is negative. So it's y equals -5 cosine. All right, I have to figure out what b is. B is equal to 2 pi over my period, which is 2 pi. So b is just 1. So y equals -5 cosine of 1x, which is just x. All right, I'm going to have you try 2 just like that. And then I will go through the answers with you. All right, so first one, we know the amplitude's 3, period is pi, and this is a sine function, but it's flipped. So I know it's y equals, the flip makes it -3 sine, but I need to find what b is. So b is 2 pi over the period, which is pi, which gives me 2. So y equals -3 sine of 2x. All right, number 4, the amplitude is 4. Period is 4 pi, because that's the length of one cycle. I know this is a cosine graph. It's not flipped, so I don't have to worry about that. So the equation, y equals 4 cosine. All right, figuring out what b is. B is equal to 2 pi over the period, which is 4 pi. Pi divided by pi is 1, and 2 over 4 is 1/2. So y equals 4 cosine of 1/2 x. All right, so we're almost done. Just going to do one more thing. We're going to identify the amplitude and period of each equation, and then we're going to graph it. All right, so on the first one, amplitude is just the absolute value of a, so that's 2. The period is 2 pi over b, which in this case b is absolute value of b is 1, so it's just 2 pi. Okay, so when I graph it, I know the whole entire cycle goes out to 2 pi. So I always have to look at, well, what's half of 2 pi is pi. That'll help me out. Okay, amplitude is 2, so I know it goes up to positive 2 and goes down to negative 2. It's a sine function, so I'm going to start at 0. I'm going to go up, down, and up. There's my graph. Okay, next one, y equals 3 cosine of 2x. Amplitude is 3. All right, the period is 2 pi over the absolute value of 2, which is 2. So the period is pi. That means one cycle goes out to pi. Half of that is pi over 2. I always write down what half is because it makes it easier when you're graphing. Okay, the amplitude is 3, so it goes up to 3, down to negative 3. It's cosine, so we have to start at the top, go down, and then back up. And that's just one cycle. All right, so I'm going to have you try 2 just like that. And then I'll go through the answers with you when you're ready. All right, so number 5, the amplitude would be 1. All right, the period is 2 pi over the absolute value of 4, which is 4, which is just pi over 2, because 2 over 4 reduces to 1/2. Okay, so I know I go up to 1, down to negative 1. A whole cycle is pi over 2, meaning half of that is pi over 4. It is sine, so I'm going to start at 0, 0, go up, down, and back up. All right, last one, amplitude is 2, period, 2 pi over the absolute value of negative 3 is positive 3. All right, so it goes up to positive 2, down to negative 2. The entire cycle is 2 pi over 3, and half of that is pi over 3. Okay, so it is cosine. I have to start at the top, go down, and back up, and you are finished.